Oh, greetings one, greetings all. You caught me having a coffee. You know what? It's been a while since I've done a ghost story concerning the North Wales Hospital, the spookiest place in North Wales. I'll just put this coffee down and we'll have a little story. Oakley dokley. Well, this doesn't actually concern the hospital, the North Wales Hospital itself. It concerns one of the numerous overspill units that were dotted around the North Wales, really, because at one time, the North Wales Hospital suggests the health authority was the whole of North Wales. It did eventually shrink to, Flintshire, Denbighshire as we know it now, Conwy, across to, Gwynedd and onto Anglesey, and eventually it did shrink even further, just down to Clwyd, or Denbighshire and Flintshire as we know it today. And the unit I'm talking about is probably the nearest to the hospital, and it's called what I knew it as was Poole Park Hospital, which was a former convalescent villa, I think, or certainly it was used, way back before my time as a sort of convalescent area where people would, with bad chests and that would go there, middle of the countryside. But eventually, in my day, it became a unit as an overspill, particularly for those patients who had become chronic, spent many, many years, decades in the North Wales Hospital, and were now well enough to be catered for in that sort of area with just, the minimum supervision. So Poole Park Hospital. Yes. Now then, I've been in my lifetime once to Poole Park, and it was probably in the year 1977. I remember it quite well. I was on night duty. A patient became ill in Poole Park, and I was required to take over medication for that patient. Now, the process around that would be that I didn't have a car, I couldn't walk. Hardly anyone really had a car. Most people lived in town when the nurse's home and would basically walk to work. And also the unions were very, very strong at that time. So it was a case of calling out the chauffeur. He would have been sorely miffed if someone had driven in his own private car and delivered, the medication. It was a job for the chauffeur to chauffeur the nurse to Poole Park. Maybe the chauffeur himself wouldn't have been nacked, but the union certainly would. Strong days in those days for the union. Different to today. Okay, so being the most junior, obviously, I had the chore of waiting for the chauffeur to show up and then getting in this old, I think it was something like Wolsey, something like that? Big 1940s, 1950s type car. Like a gangster car. And I sat in the back with this medication. Can't particularly remember what it was. It wasn't an injection, I think it was tablets. I think it was stomach medication. And I sat in the back, and there was a lovely leather. You could smell the age of the car and the leather seats and all the wood panelling and everything. Beautiful car. Antique. Vintage. Ancient. And here's me, a young man, travelling in that car in the back like royalty. Very nice. But it was pitch black. It was the dark of night. And the lights went on and off we went, and all I could see flashing past me were maybe glimpses of trees, nothing on the road. And eventually, after what seemed an eternity, we arrived at this sort of lodge where there was a gate. The chauffeur jumps out. Actually, he didn't jump out, he sort of creaked out and opened the gate, got back in the car, drove through the gate. He got out again and shut the gate again, and then we drove up this sort of track or road. And again, I couldn't really see much because we seemed to be surrounded by trees. At which point we stopped at a sort of hump in the road. All was quiet. It was deadly quiet. And in front of me, or before me, I could see the twinkling lights of, presumably, the hospital itself. It was quiet. An owl hooted. The chauffeur was sat, stock still. I was too young to say, "Hello, is everything okay?" You didn't say it to your elders. I just had to sit there. And then, what seemed like far away, I heard like a scraping. It was like a scraping of boots. And as it got louder and louder, it seemed to be like marching, as if people were marching. I looked out of the window, I saw my own reflection. And as I looked towards the trees, I saw people in uniform marching. Marching. And marching in front of the car. And marching into the woods. Suddenly there was a face at the window. A face shouting in a language I didn't understand. Was it Welsh? I don't know. And then it was gone. The chauffeur stirred. I said, "What was that? Who was he?" And he said, "Who was who?" And he inched forward and he moved forward. And the car purred forward. I was a little shaken. We got to the front of the hospital. Because a hospital, it looked just like the hospital. An imposing building. I saw in the distance some sort of chimney. We went up these steps to the door. Rang the bell. And then sanity returned. I was on home territory once again. A white coat opened the door. Hand out. "Yeah, son." And I gave him the medication. I turned to go. He said, "Do you want a cup of tea before you go?" So I looked at the chauffeur, still sat in the car. I said, "No, I better get back." "But before I go," I said, "have you got people out?" "No, they're all in bed." "Well, I've just seen people walking past the car. And I think one of them leant in and shouted at me. They're all here. They're all here." Well, it was only years later. I don't know. But it grows on you, doesn't it? Suddenly these experiences, they're blurred when they happen, but they come into focus. As I learnt more about Poole Park, I realised what I'd seen. I didn't know until, 10 years ago, 20 years after the event, that Poole Park was a prisoner of war camp. The language shouted at me was some sort of Slavic or rough German dialect. Was that a time slip? Were these figures constantly going back and forth, retracing their steps in death? Or was it my imagination? It was a dark night, surrounded by trees, and I was young and alone. whatever it was, the memory stayed with me. Poole Park Hospital. Now no more. Times move on. Eventually Poole Park closed. Patients were found out or were returned to the hospital proper as they came to the end of their lives. And all the many units, and indeed the hospital itself, eventually met with fate, met with the end. Nothing lasts forever. Change is inevitable. And as we live, we must die. But have those soldiers died? Does their spirit remain? And do they walk, march, shout, even today? Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Bye.